Okay, so good good evening. It's 7:15 in the evening here in the UK. Obviously, it's the weekend. The clocks change over here, so we're now in UK summertime. Fantastic. So the days will be getting longer, the nights will be getting shorter, and hopefully the weather will be getting a lot warmer and nicer. Um, because obviously we've had some real crap weather in Northern Europe in recent weeks. This last month has been pretty dreadful for the weather, and February was really just cold and dry. So the weather's been a bit weird lately. We've had some warm days, we've had some really cold days, and we've had snow, we've had sleet, we've had rain. We had a hailstorm on Friday as well, which was just interesting. Now, thing I want to talk about in recent weeks, the NRL has brought in its mandatory stand down policy of 11 days. It has lengthened the stand down policy in regards to concussion. And obviously, Kalen Ponga is now basically going to the US to have further concussion based treatment. Could we see yet another rugby league player having a shortened career due to head injuries? That is something up for discussion. And I'll do a video on Caden Ponga and what's going to happen with his career. Is it going to be shortened by concussion? Also, the Sydney Roosters aren't sure if Luke Keary is going to be able to complete the season, if he has any more concussions or injuries. His fitness is a concern. And Joseph Suali'i, after 2024, will be playing rugby union for a couple of years. The Sydney Roosters weren't able to keep him long term after that battle to get him to special dispensation for him to play before the age of 18. He's been lost to the game for a while. And whether he stays long term in rugby union or he circles back to rugby league is another thing. He's only just about to turn 20, so his career is going to be quite interesting. But then there's that debate about rugby union being basically hiring mercenary players from rugby league to fill the gaps in their production of talent on the production line in the Southern Hemisphere. Then we have in the NHL the jersey deal with Fanatics and the backlash from ice hockey fans, not just in North America, but globally with that decision. And as someone who does have a lot of sports merchandise, I'm not a fan of Fanatics either. Their quality control is lacking across the board. Now, what we are aware of is there's not going to be a change on the on ice product for the first 3 years of the deal. So it's basically going to be as you were before, but it's the off ice product. And what a lot of North American fans are concerned about is sponsorship on jerseys, jersey ads. Over here in Europe, we've been pretty used to having sponsors on our team's jerseys for decades, 40 plus, nearly 50 years at this point. We're pretty used to seeing, the club logo and then all the club's crest and a massive sponsor or sponsors all over our jerseys for a long, long time. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens with the off-ice product, what the fans buy in club shops and online. We've got one more year of the Adidas deal with the NHL. The fact it's a 10-year deal, I understand the NHL's thinking with having a long-term deal. It gives them a little bit of certainty in regards to their finances. But the fact they chose Fanatics is a bit of a blunder, in my opinion. There's going to be some backlash, and I think we could see a drop in fans buying Fanatics merchandise and NHL merchandise. I think it could be harmful to the league. Now, whether Fanatics ends up being completing the 10-year deal is up for debate, but I do think they need to massively improve their quality control. Basically, the NHL's gone for the bottom rung of manufacturers there. I think it could harm the NHL's image for the next decade. There's a reason why in certain areas of the US they have struggled. Also, one of the part owners, a minority owner of the Arizona Coyotes, has been arrested as well. And more information's coming out about that. It's not a good look considering the Coyotes are going into discussions with the city of Tempe in Arizona about a new arena and surrounding entertainment complex, which is a lot of money on the line there. Now they're asking for taxpayer money in that deal. Not a lot of taxpayer money. Most of it is going to be private funding, but that doesn't look good when you're trying to pitch to city councillors and city taxpayers and state taxpayers as well in Arizona for funding for your redevelopment. Now, a lot of it, as I say, is private money, which I think will go in Arizona's favour. But the fact that one of your part owners of a team is facing legal issues is not a good look. The Ottawa Senators' potential takeover deal is looking more and more likely that it's going to be done soon, and Ryan Reynolds is going to be part of that ownership group, so that's important. And yeah, we shall see what happens long term in that regard. Then we have Gareth Southgate's comments regarding young English talent coming through and his concerns. In my personal opinion, there are a lot of English players that are playing in the Premier League that he could select from, and he chooses to ignore. So those comments have sort of bitten him in the arse. And regardless of the results on the field in qualifiers and in the early stages of tournaments, we're not kicking on in the latter stages of tournaments. I think there is still an issue with getting over the line in major tournaments with Gareth Southgate. Yes, the team is better off than what it was before he took over. There is no doubt on that. I think the performances are better. Some of the younger players have really come on leaps and bounds. But I don't think he's the guy to take that next step with. He's one of the longest tenured England managers we've ever had. But it seems to be the England manager's job, much like a lot of managerial and coaching jobs, seems to be a poison chalice, in my opinion. And it does come with added scrutiny because it's the national job. There are some certain club jobs as well in football that also come with that poisonous chalice kind of moniker. Now, there's some other footballing news. The situation with Antonio Conte at Spurs, I don't think he's the manager by the end of the season. I think he's gone. I think his comments in recent days were very similar to Scott Parker's comments at Bournemouth. Scott Parker is no longer the manager at Bournemouth. He was sacked pretty quickly following those comments he made at the beginning of the season, following a heavy defeat. He's out the door. I think Antonio Conte is going to be out the door as well. But the managerial situation and the managerial go around at Spurs, there's a reason why they haven't won silver. The fact that they're going back to Pochettino, a guy who failed with potentially a better squad than what Conte's got now, tells you all you need to know about the lack of direction that Spurs has and the lack of identity that they have with a philosophy for football. And then we have the Barcelona situation. Yes, Barcelona got loads of debts, and yes, they haven't given up on their ideal of the European Super League. But they're being investigated for corruption allegations in regards to paying bribes to a refereeing chief high up in the Spanish referees body over a lengthy period of time, which is deeply concerning. And a lot of eyebrows have been raised in that regard. Now, we do know, obviously, about the financial issues that Barcelona currently face. They are serious. They are quite damaging. And now we have these allegations about off-field corruption, basically, and they are being investigated. So we'll see what happens both domestically in Spain and with UEFA, and what punishments go forward. It's not a good look on the world's biggest teams, global brand. Again, very negative headlines coming out of Catalonia and Barcelona. But it's not a good look. It really isn't. It's a really bad state of affairs there. And again, that's it's more damage to their brand and their image. So we'll see what occurs out of that. Napoli are on the verge of winning the Serie A title for the first time in nearly 30 years. And that's 30 odd years in 3 odd decades. That's an interesting subplot. They've run away with the Italian league this season, and the Italian league has suddenly become very competitive again. Juventus obviously are having their issues. Then we circle back to the Championship here in England, and multiple clubs having transfer embargoes and financial breaches off the field, and points deductions off the field. And the situation at Wigan, their financial situation, there's again, football finance is in the headlines, and for all the wrong reasons. and it's very troubling. There is no escaping that. It's a worrying turn of events. So we'll see what happens. I do fear for Wigan long term for their future. Huddersfield, Reading, Sheffield United, and Burnley have transfer embargoes. Now, two of those sides are in promotion places, and two of those sides are in a relegation fight, and that is a concern for me as a fan, regardless of the fact that some of these clubs are my club's biggest rivals. Um, that is quite concerning. All these clubs involved have all been Premier League clubs within the last 20 odd years. So that is a worry for me as well. Is these are ex Premier League clubs now? Sheffield United and Burnley look very likely to go back into the Premier League. But saying that, all these clubs in my lifetime have been Premier League clubs, and it is very, very troubling that they've been hit with these sanctions in regards to transfers. Now, the Sheffield United situation is very, very interesting. It's in regards to transfer payments being late. Burnley, I have to do some more digging on that, but that is also very, very troubling as well. The Huddersfield situation and Reading situations. Reading have had financial concerns over how the club is run since John Medeski sold up. There are concerns in regards to their ownership model and finances. Huddersfield as well. Again, concerns about their ownership model and finances. And Wigan, they are just in a financial mess. And they're a mess on the field, but they're a mess off the field as well. So there's again more concerns about football finance and the transparency and ownership models and the directors' test, as they call it, or the fit and proper persons test, which we know is a joke. And again, it shows that the EFL weak governance has led to this situation. No club should ever be under a transfer embargo or financial constraints, really. I mean, this is where I think football has definitely got the money side of the sport wrong, the distribution of TV rights wrong, ownership models are wrong. And that ultimately lies with the governing bodies, the Football League, the Premier League, and the FA. That ultimately lies with them. And then we look at clubs lower down the footballing pyramid, like Southend United and their financial struggles, and Scunthorpe United and Oldham Athletic. And again, it is trouble. It is very, very troubling, the situation these clubs find themselves in. And again, I go back to the directors' test, auditing clubs on a more regular basis, checking the financial health of clubs, more regularly. A more transparent process, I think, is ultimately required. And then we see the resistance to the fan-led review by a proportion of clubs within the English system. Not all of them. There's only a minority, and they're all in the Premier League. And it does make you wonder how transparent clubs are being with their finances, their ownership models. Obviously, at the moment, Manchester United, is it for sale? Is it not for sale? Bids are being put in. There's some concern about who's bidding and who wants to own Manchester United, and rightly so. There's been fans and fan groups have been protesting against the Glazers since before the Glazers actually took full control of the club. But the media only spin it when the team are playing badly, not when the team are winning trophies or in the hunt for trophies like they are this season. And that is what's very, very interesting, is there is a spin put on it by the media. And the situation at Manchester United with the ownership structure and the leverage takeover and the amount of debt that the club's been saddled with over the best part of 2 decades, Burnley are in a similar situation. And it's very interesting that these protests haven't gone away. There is a significant proportion of the fan base at Manchester United who have never been happy with the ownership model that is in place, regardless of the success it has brought or not brought, depending on your point of view, or how the dominance of Manchester United has ended and how they're now in a lean spell. They haven't won the league for the best part of a decade. It's still very, very striking that even when they were winning leagues under Sir Alex Ferguson, the protest movement was there. And so that is a very interesting subplot that we have. So we'll be keeping our eyes on that and whether the Glazers do finally sell up. Another deadline has been put in for this coming Wednesday. It'll be very interesting to see if it's Jim Ratcliffe who ends up being the preferred bidder or the Qatari bid is the preferred bid. There is a large amount of unease with both bids, more so with the Qatari bid over the Ratcliffe bid. There's more of a conflict of interest with Ratcliffe because he owns other football clubs at the elite level in Europe, and whether he'll be forced to sell majority stakes or completely sell up those other clubs if he wants to have an ownership stake or a full ownership of Manchester United. The Qatari bit as well. There's the Amnesty International and human rights kind of question marks, and regardless of how the World Cup went in Qatar, and there obviously was the criticism of how Qatar got that World Cup and the direction football's taking. So again, this comes back to football ownership, fan involvement. I think Sir Jim Ratcliffe has made a lot of statements in regards to fan involvement, very similar to the Newcastle Amanda Staveley-led bid, which has got a lot of Saudi money behind it. Is again fan involvement. So there is that to bear in mind. Now, if you just bear with me for a few seconds, I have to get my washing out of the washing machine. I'll be back a couple of seconds. Right, we're back. So yes, in regards, as I'm back, apologies for that. In regards, so the Manchester United takeover bid, we shall see what happens there. We shall see when bids are obviously tabled formally and what bid they go with and the direction the club takes. Now, obviously, the Glazers want to make some money because they've got to service a lot of debt, and there seems to be division within the Manchester United ownership group about selling or not selling the club. And this is what happens when you have multiple members of the same family who have different viewpoints on ownership model. So that'll be interesting. So yeah, football seems to be making a lot of headlines. Obviously, Ireland won the Grand Slam and are now ranked number one in the world on the rugby union rankings. France have slipped to second. And it's going to be interesting to see whether France and Ireland can continue that form in the World Cup at the end of the year. That's interesting to know. So there's a lot of things floating in the background. Obviously, it's going to be very interesting, the review of Welsh and the English, for example, who really had poor Six Nations, and I think England are under a lot of pressure under Steve Borthwick. He hasn't had a long time with the players, and the England performances weren't great. The Welsh performances were even worse. So it's going to be interesting to see what England and Wales do in the World Cup in France at the end of the year. It's going to be very interesting. Considering that both at domestic level, the Welsh and English games are facing massive financial problems and structural issues at the club level. So that's going to be very, very interesting to see what comes of it. Now, the AFL are facing a class action lawsuit in regards to player welfare and concussion and post playing support, and this could cost the AFL a lot of money. This class action lawsuit, and it is dividing AFL fans and those within the game of Aussie rules and the league. I think it's the biggest challenge the AFL has ever faced. in regards to player welfare and legal issues. I think it's a bigger challenge to the league and the sport, far bigger than anything uh, they've ever faced. And the outcomes of this class action lawsuit, the ramifications will be felt, because I think this is another reason why the NRL has been a little bit further ahead with the mandatory stand down period. And I think the NRL seem to be leading the way globally in regards to research into concussion. At the same time, self preservation. Self preservation, I think, because the reason why these sports are popular is the combative nature of them. And so the AFL class action lawsuit, I'm going to be doing some more research into the AFL class action lawsuit, but it could cost the game more than it can afford. And I think the NRL could also be facing similar lawsuits down the track, which is why another reason why I think they decided mid-season, even though it was early on in this season, to bring in their mandatory 11-day stand down policy. I think eventually in time that stand down policy grows in scope and length. And we've already seen players forcibly stood down because of the mandatory stand down policy. So we'll see what occurs there. Also, the Women's Six Nations has now kicked off. And it'll be interesting to see if England are still the dominant side in the women's game in the Northern Hemisphere. I think England's dropped the ball a little bit in the World Cup. I think New Zealand were right for the taking and they failed. And you could argue refereeing decisions, but there we go. Also, Freddie Stewart's red card against Ireland in that Grand Slam deciding match for the Irish has been rescinded. So, World Rugby needs to look at the application of protocols and laws it's put in place and mitigating circumstance. But also, what we're seeing is a lack of consistency between referees from game to game on the same day, pretty much, or within the same round of fixtures, international and club level. I think we are going to see this inconsistency at the World Cup in September, October, and November in France. Refereeing consistency and refereeing standards are under the spotlight right now in a variety of sports, and there's been a lot of criticism of rule changes or rule interpretations from sport to sport and refereeing consistency. I have a lot of sympathy with match day officials. I do. It's a very tough job. But at youth level, we are seeing, and at grassroots level, we are seeing a shortage of referees. We are seeing the abuse that referees face grow. So we'll see what happens there. This is an interesting question. Who is more likely to host a World Cup? China, Japan, or Korea? In what sport? Because Japan and Korea have hosted a football World Cup, and Japan has hosted a rugby union World Cup. All three nations have hosted summer and winter Olympics. So they've got a proven track record in hosting major sporting events. But I don't see there being any appetite for any of those nations to host another World Cup anytime soon or another Olympics anytime soon. They've all hosted Olympic Games in my lifetime, and they've all and Japan and Korea have hosted a football World Cup in my lifetime, and Japan's hosted a rugby union World Cup in my lifetime. I don't see any appetite from those nations for any more World Cups or Olympics anytime soon. There will be political considerations behind where future football World Cups go, but I don't see any real appetite for hosting any more major global international kind of tournaments or sporting events like a World Cup or Olympics from these nations. In my lifetime, as I say, career, just before I was born, hosted the 88 Olympics in Seoul. Japan hosted the 98 Winter Olympics at Nagano. Japan and Korea in 2002 joint hosted the FIFA Football World Cup. 2019, Japan hosted the Rugby Union World Cup. They also then, the following year, hosted, well, were planned to host the delayed 2020 Olympics. And then obviously China had the Winter Olympics just gone. So, and then Korea had the Winter Olympics in 2018 in Pyeongchang. I can't see there being any appetite right now from any of those nations to bid for any more major sporting events. I really don't. They become political issues as well. The Olympics, especially, has started to become a major political issue that no one really wants to host the Olympics. Um, yeah, no, that's a very famous World Cup upset. They beat Italy 1-0. Pak Du Hik, I think, scores the goal. And Italy had a dreadful tournament in '66. They would get to the final in 1970, but they had a dreadful tournament in '66 to the Italians. One of the best World Cup upsets at the time. And I mean, until I think Senegal beat France in the 2002 World Cup. An upset on that kind of scale hasn't been seen really since. There's been very few World Cup upsets. Maybe Morocco in this World Cup just gone, getting to the semi-finals. I think you could compare on a similar level, but yeah, a lot of people, a lot of sports fans, really, unless you're of a certain age, um, forget a lot about the sports they're passionate about and the history. A lot of sports fans think that football wasn't invented before the Premier League, for example. So when I do my club histories and my tournament histories and sporting history videos, I surprise myself with some of the facts um, that you know uh, I discover. I wouldn't say Spain narrowly losing to Germany is an upset. I would say that's about a fair reflection of where both nations were at the time. South Korea beating Portugal and Italy, that is different because there's allegations of corruption and match fixing um, with that 2002 World Cup and the South Koreans, not the Japanese. The Japanese were at that level that they were at, but some of the South Korean performances, questions have been raised over the last 21 years about were the referees, bribed? Was there corruption involved? Match fixing allegations, um, and they've never gone away. Um, but Spain at the 2002 World Cup massively underperformed anyway. Massively underperformed with the talent they had available to them. In fact, Spain regularly underperformed at tournaments for a very, very long time until their dominant spell between 2008 and 2012. Outside of that, Spain have been dreadful at tournaments. Spain has always had, the depth of talent that other nations would bite your arm off for. But they lack that destructive, gnarly agitator in midfield or defender. They lack that toughness. And tactically, outside of that, period of time, they are very, very suspect. And Spain have underperformed at a lot of tournaments, apart from between 2008 and 2012. They've really not performed to the level that people expect. And even if they get to the latter stages, they're not playing well. And the last World Cup just gone proved that. The Euros, even though they got to the latter stages, they were crap. Scarlets were amazing against the Sharks in the United Rugby Championship, good victory for a Welsh club. Yeah, Welsh Rugby Union is really under a lot of spotlight. The finances are still a topic of debate. I think the way that the union narrowly avoided a player strike is just a sticking plaster. We were here before the last World Cup, and I think in the next 4-year cycle we're going to come back to this conversation again. Yes, Scarlet's winning a one-off game. That's fantastic. That is brilliant. It's a good result. It's a one-off game. That doesn't fix the problems of player development, community outreach, finances, and the domestic game below the provinces at all. Below the regions, it really doesn't. The issues are still going to be there long after this season. There doesn't seem to be a long-term plan that seems to work, and I do fear for rugby union in Wales. Um, I don't have a good relationship with Welsh rugby union fans when it comes to the international game. I've had some very fiery conversations in the comment sections. I've faced a lot of criticism and abuse from Welsh fans, but in reality, a lot of Welsh rugby union fans are fair weather fans. They don't turn up week in, week out for their local club side to support. They only turn up for the Welsh national side at internationals. The four regions don't sell out their stadiums on a regular basis, and the Welsh Union is just a mess financially and structurally, and then they're facing all these scandals, and the Welsh game is not in a healthy position right now. Brutally honest. Um, and that's just me talking as a sports fan. That's me looking from the outside looking in. Uh, the RFU aren't in a good state either, and the English game isn't in a good state of affairs itself. So I'm not going with tinted spectacles here. I'm going in objectively going. The rugby union at the club level is a shambles globally. Globally, the model that is in place with like franchise kind of style of play is just not working. Um, and look at the failure of Super Rugby in the end. It collapsed in on itself. And this is before COVID. So the professionalism has not worked. And then you look at the game in the Southern Hemisphere, and New Zealand and Australia are still looking at rugby league going, we will just hire mercenary talent to fill holes within our own pathways. So Suoliti, for example, who's been picked up by Rugby Australia after the 2024 NRL season, that's just filling a pathway hole. Instead of investing the money that they're going to be spending on his contract within the pathways and growing the game through the amateur and grassroots level and community clubs and trying to keep talent within the rugby union system coming through, they're poaching from another sport to try and convert a cross-code player, and they're spending stupid amounts of money that could be invested in the grassroots game domestically, and that's a short-term fix. It doesn't long-term fix the problems that rugby union in Australia or Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, for example, leaving the league and going to union as well. It doesn't fix the problems of talent identification, grassroots funding. They're spending big money that they can't afford to spend poaching talent from the rival code. It highlights bigger issues that rugby union's facing. It's one of the reasons why rugby union went professional in 1995 is they were bleeding talent to rugby league and AFL in Australia, and there were the rise of the New Zealand Warriors in New Zealand, New Zealand Rugby Football Union, the New Zealand Union again really pushed for it. South Africa coming out of apartheid and joining back into the international scene. And they had a world-class side during apartheid. They just weren't allowed to play internationally. And, of course, we missed out on a whole generation of Springboks who would have steamrolled the Northern Hemisphere teams and the rest of the Southern Hemisphere, which is what they did in 1995. So the game goes professional because it feels a threat from rugby league and other sports are earning far more money, getting better TV deals. They fear they're losing ground. They have to go professional, and it hasn't been structured very well. It hasn't been implemented very well, and because of the rush to go professional and the poor implementation, rugby union is all over the place at club level. International level, it's brilliant, but club level, it's an utter shambles. Would I like to see a World Cup between or a World Cup final? England Germany obviously has happened in '66. It was West Germany. An England France final. Look, at the end of the day, the cream will always rise to the top. Obviously, hypothetically, yes, obviously an England Germany or England France final would be fantastic. Without France, we don't have the World Cup. Without Jules Rimet and organising the World Cup, I've done a video on Jules Rimet and his importance to why we have a World Cup. Without France, we don't have an IOC. but without the UK, basically, we don't have a lot of the sports that we participate in. So there we go. So England France being a final would be fantastic for the history and the importance of the sport on a global level. Who has a better Ireland? I know there's no such thing as a stupid question, but Ireland by a long way. England and Wales are a mess. Scotland are better. Oh, you wanna have a three-way hosting? There's a lot of politics there. There's a lot of suspicion there. There's a lot of division there. I think what is more likely to happen is, for example, France have already, you know, um, got, you know, an Olympics. They've got a Rugby Union World Cup. They've got a Rugby League World Cup coming up. And politically, right now, France is in a very, you know, tense situation. There are a lot of social problems in France. The government isn't very popular. Um, and to host a major tournament, that's a lot of money, that national governments have to outlay. And with how things currently stand financially for a lot of countries, it's an expense countries don't want. And the current French government is not particularly popular, so that will be very interesting to see if they do decide to try and get a World Cup. Consider they've not that long ago had a Euros. Um, um, Germany, I think they have got a Euros or a World Cup pending, and there is and I think the UK and Ireland bid for, I think is it the 2028 Euros, I think is a favoured bid. So I can't see any of those nations getting a World Cup on those dates. I just can't see it happening with um, considerations politically, finances, and a lot of the politics going on as well. Well, Robbie, working on a World Union competition for the future. Um, look, I think I like how the international game is at the moment to a certain extent. Obviously, there is always room for improvement. But there's a lot of issues that I think World Rugby needs to fix before it starts fiddling with international calendars and rankings, coefficient, and a lot of it's to do with domestic games in the various countries um, that play the game at a high standard. As I said, the club game is an absolute shambles financially. The international game is in a healthy position. It's club level is where a lot of the concerns really lie. Um, but we've got a World Cup in what 6 months' time to look forward to, and so, yeah, it is what it is. Great Britain got a win at the Baseball World Classic. Am I surprised? I've got friends who are baseball fans, and I've got friends who play the game. I'm not surprised that. I think this is where Major League Baseball could do more in growing the grassroots of the game uh, outside of North America. And Asia Pacific, and Latin America have very healthy domestic league competitions, and the best players end up in Major League Baseball. But Major League Baseball is obviously focusing now on their London series, and this could be one of the benefits of that London series is inspiring the next generation. It's just about getting the facilities in place. Um, am I surprised? Not overly. At the moment, Major League Baseball's in pre-season, so a lot of the players are not match fit, match ready. They're going into their pre-season training camps. Major League Baseball and the sport as a whole has a bad PR image at the moment. Um, and baseball as a sport is losing fans rather than gaining them. So that's an interesting one. UK, France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands. That'll be ridiculous. We've just had the Euros a couple of years ago with that pan-European tournament idea, and you wait for God when they were doing that again. A five-nation co-host will never happen. Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Italy and Spain don't like each other politically. Spain and Portugal don't like each other politically. Well, that would be a difficult one to pull off. There's a lot of historical and social dislike between the three countries. While it would be nice, it's not going to happen. There's a lot of a lot of issues. Again, political issues there. Um, Spain sees Portugal as a breakaway province, basically. There's a lot of nationalistic issues there, and Italy and Spain have an interesting history that goes back before Italy was a fully unified country, and even um, too far apart. You've got the logistics. No, let's stop having these type of. While it'll be yay, great, it's not going to happen. So let's just think logically. I think with future World Cups and Euros, and it's going to be harder for nations to put forward bids. FIFA is clearly, going in a direction where it wants to take it to new countries. Um, South Africa should have beaten Liberia. That's called match fixing. Has anyone ever thought about match fixing? I know it's all a bit of fun, but these hypothetical questions, it's not going to happen. We can all speculate where we would like to see World Cups go and tournaments be hosted. Um, what we're seeing is it's kind of more and more difficult to make sure each country gets a fair, crack at the whip. Some countries are just not economically or you know or structurally got the infrastructure in place to host a major tournament. Um, Others, it's the expense would be not worth the risk. It does come with some political negativities. A lot of governments, when they back a proposal to be a host nation, it does come with a lot of cost uncertainty. And if there's issues in the build up to a tournament with facilities not being built or completed on time and other things going wrong, the government and the organisers get a massive share of the blame. Um, what we have seen is obviously with the Qatar bid, and to a certain extent some other World Cups as well, is that stench of corruption going with it, and a lot of countries right now want to get as far away from that as possible. What could get Southgate sacked? Because my friend believes if England struggle to beat San Marino, I won't believe that. They could sack. I think his comments coming out criticising youth development and not enough English players in the game are erroneous. I don't think he actually looks at the stats. There are actually more English players now playing in the Premier League than when Gareth Southgate was playing in the Premier League. So Gareth Southgate doesn't live in reality, and it comes down to who he is bloody selecting. He's clearly overlooking really talented players. There's a reason why English players are now playing overseas more often now than what they were when he was playing at the peak of his powers in the Premier League. I think he needs to get out. Southgate, for me, yes, where the team is now to where it was before he took over, it is in a better place. There is no doubt on that. We're winning knockout games at tournaments, which is fantastic. We've made progress. But to take that next step, he's got to go. The FA want a yes man in play. The reason why Venables didn't and Hoddle were short term in the job was not because of their lack of skill at coaching, because they were risky when it came to their private lives or their views on certain things. There's a reason why Hoddle got the job. There's a reason why Venables got the job. Yet they are far better managers than Southgate. Southgate's the yes man. Southgate doesn't ruffle the FA's feathers, which is a problem. I think Bayern Munich done the right thing by bringing Tuchel and Nagelsmann. It shows Bayern are panicking a little bit. That's a very reactionary decision. But as I said, I think the Bayern dominance would have to end at some point. They can't win the league every season, and it's looking likely that they are being challenged for the league title in Germany. And they've sacked him. Tuchel, I don't think Tuchel will be Munich manager very long. His track record of staying at a club more than 2 or 3 years is just not there. And he tends to fall foul of directors of football and club boards. And you look at his track record, yes, he wins trophies. He does. But he's the younger version of Mourinho. He ruffles feathers at board level. He ruffles feathers with scouts, with directors of football, with performance directors. And he's a very difficult character to get on with and work with. It happened at Dortmund, happened at PSG. Now, Dortmund have a very similar structure to Bayern Munich, ironically. So he's got a track record in German football of not sticking around very long, and he's out the door. So I'm not sure whether it necessarily is the right appointment. But that no, we'll see what happens. Is my answer to is it the right decision? Is it the wrong decision? Um, oh look, we're not running away with the league. We have to sack the manager. Well, maybe the other clubs in Germany have caught up. Maybe the Bayern dominant era is coming to an end, and at some point you need to look at why you stop winning, or what, or look at okay, the other clubs have improved. They've closed the gap. We need to figure out why. But I think German football is on a little bit of a decline at the moment. The national team isn't doing very well. Uh, the the league has become less competitive in the last decade, which is why I've done a lot of videos on the history of German football. There's a lot of German clubs that, if you're under the age of 30, you don't realise have won silverware and been successful. And Bayern weren't always winning everything. Even in the 70s, they were challenged a lot. In the 90s, they were challenged a lot. And before the 1970s, they barely won anything. So there is that kind of backdrop to it. Is in the more modern times, they've been very well run, very successful, but it took them a while to win their first Bundesliga title, and it it is interesting. Um, but the Dortmund system, they rely more on bringing new talent through than hiring the mercenary players. I think Bayern Munich finally it's caught up with them, but they're not bringing enough of their youth talent through quick enough. Where they're poaching players from other clubs rather than doing what made them successful initially was bringing a lot of talent through as a core and then adding the star players to that. Now they just throw it. They've become a bit like the Galacticos a little bit, except they're like Real Madrid, where they're not bringing enough talent through their system at one time. They're poaching the talent from other clubs. You know, basically let the other clubs develop the player, snatch the player from the other club, but they're not developing their own. So it's about building their identity, and it's caught up with them a little bit. I think they need to go back to their own youth system more, and they need to have a couple of seasons where they refresh themselves and their structures. And I think it's healthy that they're not winning all the time now. I think it is healthy. I think the warning signs have been there for a little while. This dominant machine um, is starting to slow down, and at some point they will have to go through this phase of refresh and restructure. And we'll see what happens. You think Bayern Munich should get Klopp when Klopp leaves Liverpool? That is interesting, but they've gone for Tuchel. He was Dortmund manager before. Um, is Klopp the right one though? It will be interesting if they do. I think maybe his time at Liverpool is coming to an end. I think some of the squad policies and transfers and retaining players, I don't think they quite got their squad management right and their transfer policy right in the last couple of years. I think that's come back to haunt them a little bit. Um, there's no doubt he's been very successful in the time he's been there. The team is better now than what it was before. But again, um, any other era, they've won more titles. It's because Man City are there. Simple as. But I also think, as I say, in any other era, they win more. They just have another good side who's consistently been that little bit better. Both Man City and Liverpool have set record-breaking seasons for themselves as clubs and the league as a whole. Um, and yeah, we could argue, in the last decade, Klopp has been a very successful manager. The fact they've only got one league title out of that is the concern. But they've been to three Champions League finals, winning one. He's managed to win cup finals, which was an Achilles heel of Jurgen Klopp, is that he couldn't win those cup finals. And he's been, yeah, as I say, very very successful. But you can see the pressure is starting to get to him. The COVID period has definitely disrupted Liverpool's trajectory, and I think their squad management, they've got certain signings wrong and certain player management wrong. Um, uh, and injuries have had an impact. But no, Bayern Munich. It'll be interesting to see if eventually Klopp ends up there. Um, but again, the sudden resurgence of Dortmund and other clubs like Eintracht Frankfurt have put pressure on Bayern Munich that they haven't had for a while, which I think is good. I think German football needed that change at the top to freshen things up because it's becoming a bit of a stale league with Bayern winning all the time. And what I've found out while doing my club histories in Germany is Bayern haven't won all the time. This is their most successful period. And the way the UEFA coefficient works and current football financing works, it's harder to end a successful spell for a club. So it's nice to see the German league becoming more competitive again. I think it will benefit German football in the next 5 to 10 years, much like the Italian league suddenly becoming competitive again. I think again that will benefit Italian football over the next 5 to 10 years. Um, England 20s last week beat against Germany and have some talent coming through whether they'll get game time. I think we I think we need to look at how domestic club structures how they're going. But again, with club finances being strained at the moment, I think they might. I think we might see some of these young players, getting game time, whether it's at the Premier League level or Championship or League One or League Two. I can see first team football for a lot of these young players coming through. It's about making sure that they develop and progress. But then you look at some of the success stories where players were thrown on the scrap heap when they were teenagers who've gone on to have very successful careers. I always use Grant Holt, Jamie Vardy, and Ricky Lambert as the examples. Ian Wright as an example. Um, these are the examples that stick out to me where these guys were thrown on the scrap heap and did it in the non-league. Then they get noticed by the bigger club and they end up playing at the top level, winning silverware. Or Grant Holt's case, just playing, in the top league. Ricky Lambert just getting international caps. This is, I think, something that people overlook. My top 5 biggest clubs. Are we going by the actual Forbes rankings, or by what people that perception? Um, for financial worth, or brand value, I think is what people say. They go Real Madrid, Barcelona, Manchester United, Bayern Munich, AC Milan, Juventus, Liverpool, and all that. It's a difficult one because it's subjective. I think the Forbes list is flawed. I think there's some creative accounting going on there, and then you've got to look at global fan base, and that one to me is something I think is flawed because some of like Bayern Munich, for example, is not the most popular club in Germany. PSG is not the most popular club in France for members and fans. You know, some of these clubs, yeah, have that international standing because of the success they've had historically and how they, selling their brand on a global level. But those clubs you've listed are really hated in their domestic countries and don't have the biggest fan bases domestically, ironically, um, and are really not liked within their domestic league structures. Fans hate them. But on a global standpoint, they sell merchandise. They create interest on social media or on news websites or on TV. The sports journalists obviously have a bias towards them because of the historical success that they've had. But when you actually get down to it, other clubs have massive fan bases who are less successful, but the fans are far more, passionate about the clubs, and the fan bases, domestically at least, are bigger. And the clubs you've listed are some of the most hated clubs in the world, as well as some of the biggest fan bases in the world. So it's always a subjective list. When I've done my club histories, some of the more popular videos are for some of those lesser clubs. Where did Bayern Munich and Juventus get in the Premier League? Well, Juventus we know are corrupt as hell, so they would try and bribe their way to the top. And Bayern Munich, Um, I don't think would have the spending power that other clubs have in the Premier League because they like to hoover up other clubs' best players, so the other clubs can't, um, can't establish themselves. And I think that policy is starting to hurt them as well because of their lack of youth development in recent times, or lesser youth development in recent times. Um, where do they get? Right now, with the players they have right now, or historically? Um, Juventus are more successful than Bayern historically for domestic trophies won and players who've gone on to represent their national sides. That's a difficult one, partly because the English game is historically more competitive, and that is a difficult one. It is again that's a question mark on that one. Um, really is a question mark on that one. Um, and Bayern's success is far more recent than Juventus's as well. Juventus have been successful from the get-go. Bayern weren't always successful from the get-go and have gone long periods without winning. It's only in more recent times that they're expected to win trophies or compete for trophies. Um, and you could argue that, yeah, in my lifetime, Bayern have been very, very successful, and in the modern era, but historically, throughout history, that they've had periods where they're less successful. Um, New MLS franchise, the St. Louis City Soccer Club have won 5 games. Well, again, this is the growth of the MLS and whether it's sustainable they're going down the expansion path of growth rather than looking at of financial growth rather than stabilisation and trying to grow the game. That way, it's good to see an expansion team start well, and I think you can always get that new team bounce. Um, However, can they sustain it? And will they have a breakout season in the first year? Because normally with expansion teams, you expect initially them to have that bright start, and then as the season goes on, they fade a bit. And I've got to look at again, yeah, I do more videos on the MLS and how the finances compare, player development. Is it having a beneficial impact on the national team and the quality of players that the US are now producing? And for that extent, Canada as well. And is it actually benefiting the sport, or are more fans of the sport in the US and Canada really more interested in the European leagues, for example? So that'll be interesting to look at the MLS and is the growth in the sport partly down to the MLS growing, or in the US and Canada, or is it more just growing interest um, in the European club game and the international World Cups, for example? Yes, I mean they do need to obviously look at. There's going to be further expansion. The MLS needs further expansion to be on the same level as the other major leagues. Um, we'll see if their strategy of rampant expansion is long term going to be beneficial for the league. Because at some point, expansion has got to stop, and they've got to have consolidation. And that's the point where we find out the MLS as a league structure how solid it is. But they will be expanding at some point. There will be another team added at some point. Where that team is added is a wait and see moment. There are several teams that are interested who are currently already playing at the lower levels in the US and Canada who have viable options, and we'll see where the MLS goes next. Um, yeah, that's to do with stadium issues. Stadium wise, they've not got the right size stadium to do it, and there are stadium issues with getting a better facility or upgrading the facility they currently have. Um, And of course, one of our subscribers, Dan, and one of my moderators, Dan, who we see quite regularly, works for Sacramento. So I don't want to badmouth the team too much and the organisation too much. There are those who watch the channel who may know more about, obviously, uh, the Sacramento situation. But yeah, facilities, having a better facility or facility upgrades was, I think, the main issue there. It's not for the lack of fans in California or the lack of interest. I just think the stadium was the problem. Do I think the XFL is doing okay with Dwayne Johnson as their owner? The NFL really does not like other leagues popping up. It tries its best to kill them. Um, there's a big risk with the XFL. Obviously, the CFL have had its struggles in Canada. They tried to expand into the US and it didn't go very well for them. The AAF obviously folded. The XFL has failed before. Yeah, the NFL doesn't like rival American football leagues playing on their turf. Um, do I think it's doing okay? It hasn't really reached my consciousness, but I've really tuned out from American football in recent years. Um, it doesn't have the same appeal for me that it did when I was younger. It's not really hitting the European fan base with the interest that I think it could have done. But I think the failure of the XFL in the past and the issues that the XFL has had over a long period of time as a brand and with its attempts previously, and I think you know the NFL doesn't like rival leagues, really doesn't, and you can always argue that is the CFL a better product on field product, but the NFL is the dominant American football league now. I think the issue that American football has is it doesn't have a minor league kind of structure where players can develop. It's college, eh, the pro leagues, or nothing. If you find out a fan supported, now I'm assuming we're talking about viewer supported Chelsea, Man United, Liverpool, Juventus, Bayern Munich. How will I feel about the fan? It doesn't bother me who people support. Um, I can be critical of a fan base and the fan base's behaviour, and certain teams have a minority of fans who let their team down with their behaviour and some of their antics in any sport. There are certain teams that have a bad reputation because of their fan base, getting up to stupid things or not meeting the standards that we expect. Doesn't really bother me. I've got friends who are fans of the above aforementioned clubs. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I've got viewers who are every single football club. I've probably got viewers and subscribers who pretty much support most football clubs in Europe. To me, it doesn't bother me who someone supports. Uh, I've come across almost every single football club fan you can think of. Um, I think that's part of the joy of sport is you meet fans of rival teams, or you have friends who are fans of rival teams. I think that's the positive aspect of the modern day. See, back 20, 30 years ago, you were less likely to move from, let's say, Northern England to London or vice versa. You were less likely to because the economic opportunities were different. Um, but, economics have changed. People do relocate more often for work now than they did before. And obviously, people emigrate as well. So, what we've seen is um, cities like London, for example, are very cosmopolitan melting pots with people from all around the world, and they bring their little corner of whatever country they've come from with them, and their fandom goes with them. It's the same with cities like Birmingham and Manchester and Glasgow. These global cities that we have in the UK, which have a global outreach because of their importance with business and industry, and with those immigrant populations. And it's the same in the US as well. Same in Australia. Um, people with certain industries, people have relocated. So the oil industry, for example, or the energy sector, shipbuilding, for example. Um, People who are in the military, end up all over the place. Banking, uh, tech companies. My family relocated when I was young to America. I could have ended up in Colorado, for example, which would have radically changed, what this channel is all about and the sports that I cover. Um, so yeah, I mean, I know I've got viewers all around the world who watch this channel for a variety of sports. I know recently I got a subscriber from Brazil who's interested in Port Vale. I know I've got viewers who are St Mirren fans who aren't living in Scotland right now who've relocated because of the oil and gas industry. I think one of them is actually in Russia, which is a bit of a hot topic right now. But I look at my comment section and there are a lot of people all around the world who say, "Look, I support this team or that team," for example, and uh, it's very interesting. And I look at you know um, my analytics, the data, and where people are viewing from, and I'm quite popular in like Ireland, for example. Um, a lot of that's to do with my rugby union content, but it's only Six Nations and World Cups that I really, get into my rugby union content. Um, but you know, it is an interesting one. Um, I don't really. It doesn't bother me what club you support or where you are in the world, really. Um, what I find very very interesting is the club history videos. I'm really surprised by the amount of people who are viewing them from all over the world, not just certain locations. And some of those clubs who are currently in the lower divisions have fans around the world. And the view counts from, let's say, lower division clubs or those more regional clubs with more, localized fan base that we think would have localized fan base actually have fans globally, and people are watching that content more than some of the bigger clubs. I think that's the media misrepresentation of fandom. As I say, what clubs like Liverpool, Manchester United are really hated in the UK. Um, Generally by the local fan bases, like I say, the domestic fan base. Globally, they have a big fan base, but domestically, people really don't like Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea. Um, um, so, yeah, for me, it doesn't bother me who you support. Really. It doesn't bother me. It's kind of interesting meeting people from different backgrounds who support different teams. Um, and some of the feedback saying like, oh, I look at my comment section, for example, and some of the comments saying, thank God someone's finally doing a video on my team or discussing my team. We don't get a lot of recognition in the media. Really appreciate it. Or I'm a so and so fan here of this club. Um, you know, and I live in this location. It's like how the I think that's the global appeal of sports like football, or you know, where other sports could learn about how football has, you know, globalized itself and sold itself to a global audience. I support Liverpool, but I mean, I get criticised for it. But I never. Well, I'm a Blackburn fan. I people go, "What? Why?" And it's like because I like going against the grain. I like the underdog, and it is interesting. I mean, as I say, I think the media gives a false representation of a fan base and how big a fan base is, and because it winds people up, people go, "Oh, here we go again." It creates that controversy why they keep writing stories on it. But no, Liverpool as a club, fantastic history. Um, they've always produced great youth talent, very successful. Unfortunately, there's a proportion of the fan base that lets the club down. Um, Same with Manchester United. Um, but you know, that they are a very successful side historically for a reason. But they weren't always. They weren't always one of the top sides in the country. That's what a lot of fans today forget about. Is before the '60s, they weren't very good historically when it comes to trophies. Manchester United were not the first side from Greater Manchester to win major silverware. I think that was Bury, and then Man City won silverware before Manchester United. So a lot of Manchester United and Liverpool's success has come in more recent times historically than other clubs. Um, and the interesting thing is how the media they really have a love hate relationship with the media, but it serves its purpose. And because they have that relationship with the media, not only nationally but internationally, it helps create interest in those teams on a more global standpoint. Because they've been successful in the European competitions in the modern era, and they've won that silverware on the European stage in what I call the satellite TV era. And with the global TV rights, that helps sell the clubs to a wider audience. Because both Manchester United and Liverpool have American owners, it sells the game and the clubs to the US fan base. Yes, they were. They were. So were Everton. Manchester United were in the second tier in the '70s and early '80s. Manchester United and Liverpool at points were dreadful. Um, I mean, Aston Villa have spent spells in the second tier. They're one of the most successful clubs in English footballing history. They haven't won a trophy for a long time, but they've always pretty regularly been in the top two tiers of English football. And look at the club histories that I've done. There is a trend where clubs will go through lean spells and not win silverware for a lengthy period of time. Manchester United and Liverpool have had those spells of less success. Um, and some clubs just have that one purple patch where they get all that success and then nothing for significant periods of time. Other clubs, it's every now and then they win silverware, but not on a regular basis. But they will have that little period, then a gap, another little period, then a gap, and you have that drip drip effect where they're competitive, but they're not winning all the time. And then you have those clubs that it's just flash in the pan and it's done, and they don't win anything ever again. Um, and some clubs, it's that one trophy, and then it's done. So we'll see what happens with like Villarreal, for example, whether they can win more silverware. Um, like Bayer Leverkusen got the nickname Bayer Leverkusen because they got close and fell, but they've actually won silverware, but not a lot. Um, you know, Wolfsburg have had a smattering of success, but in reality aren't very successful. Cagliari in Italy have only won one major trophy ever. Hellas Verona have won one major trophy in Italy. Sampdoria's successful spell was the late '80s, early '90s, and that's it. They've not won anything before or after. So there are some clubs that are literally flash in the pan or have that small period of being very successful, and other clubs are just trophy machines that success is expected, failure is not an option. And some clubs have that we must win every season mentality. We rebuild is not allowed. Rebuild is a dirty word, and it ends up hurting them. So your Chelseas, your Manchester United, your Liverpools, and they're not prepared for tough times where they're going to have a down spell, and then suddenly it gets very hard to get the team back to winning ways. Real Madrid and Barcelona, failure is not an option at all. And I think, unfortunately, it's having a negative impact on Spanish football. There's only one other club that's never been outside the top flight in Spain, and that's Athletic Bilbao. How long that continues with their Cantara policy is, up for debate. If they got relegated with that Cantara policy, I bet you they drop it. But Spanish football is historically not as competitive as it should be. And that is, I think, a downside. I think Spanish football could be a lot more competitive, but unfortunately, Real Madrid and Barcelona do their very, very best to make sure it isn't. which I think has negative impacts on Spanish football. Um, but now what we're seeing with Barcelona and with Real Madrid and the allegations that are coming out about them and their financial practices and how they conduct themselves, we'll see. That last question makes no sense grammatically, so I'm just not going to answer it. When did you think Juventus was finished? What year? In what sense? Juventus has a lot of off-field issues, but I think will harm the club long term. I don't even think Juventus has fully recovered from the Calciopoli situation, which has done more damage to Italian football than the match fixing bribery scandal of the late 70s, early 80s that involved Paolo Rossi, for example. And now what we're finding out about Juventus having some dodgy accounting as well, and their attachment to the European Super League has done untold damage to um, the game. I think Juventus are in for a tough spell. I really do. I don't think they are prepared for going through a rebuild and a restructure. Um, they've got too used to winning all the time, even with nefarious means, and now they've been found for having creative accounting. Well, look, I think Bayern. I think there's going to be a crossroads with football and direction of football. I'm slowly falling out of love with the game. I don't enjoy football as much as I did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I think my love of the game has definitely shifted. Um, I don't enjoy the sport as much as I did when I was younger. Um, I think we've reached a point where I think there's too much money in the game. I think the players are overpaid, and the sport has got a lot of issues that it's failing to deal with. I think there's a lot of issues with corruption within the game that either the game is turning a blind eye to or is just not willing to accept is a problem. Um, and clubs are running into financial difficulty because things like the UEFA coefficient and the way the European game is structured and TV deals are structured, they've chased the dollar signs, the pound symbols, the euros. They've chased the money and they've chased the cash over the quality. And I honestly believe the quality of football was at a better level 25 years ago than it is now. I think we've gone backwards as a sport, and the direction the sport's taking worries me um, greatly. And I think uh, the sport globally is, as I say, at a crossroads, and the governance side of it's shambolic. The corruption scandals and that keep coming out in regards to the sport concern me massively. Um, and the structures of the sport and the lack of trust between fans, governing bodies uh, is very worrying as well. Um, there is a clear cynicism, I think, um, there with fans. I think the trust between fans and the governance of the game and the club hierarchies, the club owners, is definitely at an all-time low. Um, and there is a growing cynicism about the future of the sport. I think the European Super League debacle has definitely ignited passions, but that cynicism is there. Away from FIFA, there's a cynicism about the governance of the game, the direction the game's taking, the greed of the game, um, and how the cash is not being evenly distributed, and a handful of clubs basically trying to hoard all the assets, all the wealth, and all the success in the wrong type of way. I think um, the sport is going down is at a crossroads, and I fear the direction the sport is going to take long term. I really do. I do fear the direction we are headed, and to me, I can't see a change of course because again, there are a handful within the sport who've got exceptionally greedy. I think the role of player agents has definitely damaged the sport. I think, as I say, the attitude of young players is not right. I think there's a lot of players who don't live in the real world. They've got this sense of entitlement. Um, they're not humble enough. Um, and then we have a lot of the negative stories coming out about player misbehaviour, and that worries me. When I say player misbehaviour, serious offences are being alleged against players, and players are going on trial and getting arrested, and all this kind of stuff. It does worry me about, you know, these, let's be honest, young men who are not, growing up or behaving in a manner that is acceptable. Um, it worries me. It does. Oh yes, Boundary Park, a stadium that has had a lot of issues in recent years with the stadium infrastructure. It, yeah, Oldham Rugby League Club. Wow, they've not get not they've not been at the top level for quite some time. The modern era has not been kind to Oldham when it comes to sport. But then you've got to look at the community of Oldham and the disposable income and the job opportunities and the deprivation. Sport is a release for these people, but unfortunately, in the modern globalized sporting world, money's tight, and Oldham, there's not a lot of money in Oldham. There's not a lot of job opportunities for people in Oldham, um, which in the modern professional sporting world means you're not going to make a lot of money, which means you're going to struggle to compete against wealthier clubs and wealthier locations for fans being able to attend games, profit margins. But it's nice to see the rugby league team back at Boundary Park. It's been a very, very long time. And can you see Bournemouth winning the Premier League one day? Um, uh, we shall see if there's another upset Premier League winner. I think Arsenal are going to win this season, which will be good because they have not won the league for a very, very long time. Obviously, Leicester have won it. Blackburn have won it. It's plausible. It's not without the realms of possibility, although again, there would have to be massive problems at other clubs for that to happen. Um, but they've never won a major trophy before, so a major trophy, one of the cup competitions is probably like an FA Cup or a League Cup is probably more likely within the next 10 years than the Premier League. But look at what Leicester have done. No one expected them to win the Premier League in the 2015-2016 season, and they did. That wasn't on the cards. Then they go and win the FA Cup. That wasn't expected. They got to a European quarterfinal, European semi-final. Um, so, but Leicester historically had been to cup finals and had won major silverware. It's an interesting one, I think, with the way the modern game's going. Um, we shall see. Although the historical aspect of the English game and the competitiveness of the English game historically means it's not without the realms of possibility. But the stars would have to align. I think they're more likely to win a cup competition like the League Cup or the FA Cup than a Premier League title. And they would have to be obviously a Premier League side to win it. And the way they're going at the moment, I don't know. But yeah, their rise in the last 10, 15 years um, has been duly noted. But it's sustained themselves in the Premier League first, and then maybe winning a League Cup or an FA Cup to start that winning. But other clubs have won that first trophy, and then it's the wheels have fallen off very, very quickly. Wigan Athletic, for example, Birmingham City winning their first trophy in a while, for example. Yeah, it hasn't obviously been a bed of roses since then. Leicester, and they've won a few trophies in recent years, so it's plausible. If City and Chelsea lose to Bayern and Real Madrid, do you see it as a failure of the Premier League this season in Europe? I think, swings and roundabouts when it comes to European competition, in my personal opinion. Swings and roundabouts. Only a handful of leagues in the modern era have produced European winners, and again, that's the criticism of the UEFA coefficient and how UEFA dishes out coefficient points and getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup. I think was the biggest blunder UEFA ever came up with, and the way they've reformatted the Champions League and Europa League again. It's UEFA chasing the money there, and the clubs chasing the money over sporting integrity. If City don't win the Champions League, that starts to become that running joke. Um, really, and I honestly see the City juggernaut slowing down. Um, Chelsea, I mean, look, Chelsea are a mess this season. Liverpool are a mess this season. Do I see it as a failure of the Premier League? Not really. Not really. I see it more as a failure of those clubs. Um, in reality, with their squad management, um, and, and Manchester City, for example, they've got some player misbehaviour that they need to sort out, and player attitudes. I mean, Carl Walker's had his issues with the authorities yet again. Obviously, the Benjamin Mendy situation is not fully resolved, which raises question marks about the culture within the Manchester City dressing room, which then raises questions. And then Manchester City themselves are having their financial fair play investigation, which I think will have long term implications because we know they're going to be found guilty. If the Premier League start watering down the punishment, it becomes a bit of a joke, really. Yes, that is true. Since 2011, only 3 countries have lifted the Champions League. And that in itself is a massive problem. The fact that only, I think, 8 countries have actually lifted the European Cup in total is a problem. But then you have to look at it and go, well, why did they get rid of, the Cup Winners' Cup? Why did they reformat the UEFA Cup to the Europa League? Why did they reformat, the European Cup to the Champions League, and then the restructuring of those competitions? And yes, you can argue that only a handful of clubs have won it since 2011, which is another problem. The TV rights, you know, the direction the sport's taken. You could argue that, this is where I argue the quality of football is less now than what it was 20, 25 years ago. And it's down to UEFA's coefficient to start with, and then how the TV deals are sorted out and ownership models are sorted out. And the UEFA coefficient has a massive part to play in the direction the sport's taking. It is troubling. And historically, the old, European Cup, the European club competitions were very, very competitive, and they're not as competitive anymore, which is a massive problem. I don't like the direction we are going with European club football, but UEFA, they see money symbols, they see dollar signs, they see euro signs, they see pound symbols. They don't focus on actually the quality of the product rather than as long as it makes them as much money as possible. And those handful of clubs, all of those clubs apart from Bayern Munich, signed up to the European Super League. So greed has overtaken the game, which for me is definitely damaging the quality of the product. It's quality over quantity, in my opinion. Less is more. Less is more. I think the greed aspect of the game is killing it. And it's having more negative impacts on the quality of product we actually see. I honestly believe the quality of football we're watching now, as I say, is less than the quality that came before. I think that's my honest opinion on that. That opinion is not going to change. I think, as I said, quality we're going through a downswing pot, in my personal opinion. And I think too much money in the game is part of that issue. And then you look at the structures of the UEFA competitions and the UEFA coefficient is where the rest of the problem lies. Scrap the UEFA coefficient and restructure the competitions how they were structured before, suddenly the problems resolve themselves. More emphasis is put on domestic competitions, and then You know, actually having the champions of every country going in, cup winners going in, suddenly it revitalises domestic competitions and makes them more competitive, which is what they haven't been for a very, very long time. But that's my 2 cents. I would rather that the clubs make a little bit less money and the leagues scrap the UEFA coefficient and UEFA make a little bit less money necessarily to a certain aspect, and then suddenly the quality improves. Money, money. Well, it's good to have positive financial outcomes and a healthy financial aspect of the sport. When cheapen the product or rip off the fan, basically, you weaken the product. It's the same with ticket price. It's the same with merchandise deals. It's the same with you know you look at manufacturing date like your modern car. The components now are cheaper. They're cheaply made and overpriced. That's what football players are. They're overpaid and the quality is less. They get lazy. They get entitled. You know, very rarely do you see a player, going for less money, saying, "I will take a pay cut to stay at my club." Do I watch what for tunes or the champion? What question is that? Like, do I watch what? That question makes no sense. You need to get no, I don't. I don't. You need to put question marks in and punctuation, otherwise your questions make no sense. Yeah, it's called basic grammar. No, I don't watch. I don't really watch other football channels really. I don't really watch a lot of other sports YouTubers really. If I'm being brutally honest, I really don't. Um, I can see your English isn't the best. Did you pay attention in school? Because I swear either you don't pay attention or you're more interested and you're easily distracted. Just that little bit of care and consideration, you can go a lot further. Um, but that's a favour of the English education system. But that's another thing. Do I watch? I don't know. I don't really watch a lot of other sports YouTubers. Really, most of the content I watch is actually documentary based and factual based. I don't watch a lot of other YouTubers like me who discuss sport. Um, oh, right, you're from a foreign country. Um, right, that makes a lot of sense. I actually thought you were just what I would call an urchin over here, which is basically someone who's um, a bit chatty. But if you're foreign, that makes a lot of sense. Again, like no, I don't watch a lot of other YouTubers when it comes to sports YouTubers. But there are certain times when I do watch, like, how do I put it? Where I do watch something because it's controversial. There's a discussion to be had. And in regards to a discussion to be had, like I will watch a podcast, for example. They're quite interesting. Or I watch a debate kind of channel, like, and there are certain moments, like some of like decisions certain sports and certain governing bodies have made are worth discussing and looking at. So, for example, if I was a YouTuber back when the Gaelic Amateur or no Gaelic Athletic Association decided to allow Croke Park to be used by the Irish Rugby Union and football associations to have their national sides while um, the Aviva was being rebuilt or Lansdowne Road was being redeveloped. That was a really controversial decision all those years ago. It was a very divisive, controversial decision. And as I said in my recent video today on the Gaelic Athletic Association, I don't think that decision gets made in the 90s or the 80s, for example, or the 70s, with the political and social aspects at the time. It doesn't get that decision doesn't happen. It shows how far and how much of a long way we have come, how far we have come as a society, both in the UK and Ireland, that that decision actually happened. And even then, there was a massive debate whether it should have gone ahead or not. In the end, I think the GAA made the right decision there. It's like the NHL, obviously, recent days announcing the jersey manufacturing deal with Fanatics. That has been roundly criticised by everyone. Not a very popular decision. Um, it's not the length of deal being a 10-year deal, which is a good certainty to have, not the money involved. It's the choice of partner the NHL has partnered up with. Massive. The NHL is not very good at reading the room. Now, whether that was the only manufacturer they had in mind, or whether they considered other multiple bids to be the jersey manufacturer, that will come out in time. The fact that Adidas did not want to renew or decided it was agreed that they weren't going to renew their deal with the NHL obviously raised some eyebrows as well. It was greeted with disappointment by fans. I think the Adidas deal has been good for the NHL. It's been good for Adidas. It's had a positive. The quality of was brilliant. So we'll see that. Do I see the Dublin Exiles ever joining the European Rugby League Super League system? Well, this is where I think rugby league needs to buck its ideas up. Clearly, there is a growing interest in rugby league globally outside of Northern England and the east coast of Australia. They're the heartlands of the sport. Clearly, there is an interest there. I've done my video. I'm going to do a video on the history of rugby league in Ireland. I think that's something that really surprises me how little of an imprint it actually has across the Irish Sea. But do I see it ever happening? Obviously, the failures that rugby league has had with North American experiment have, you know, been felt and long lasting, in my opinion. And I think have had done some reputational damage to the Super League and the RFL. Obviously, French Rugby League has got its own historical battles to fight and issues with the structures of French Rugby League. Obviously, the NRL is the leading league globally, but obviously, all is not well down under. There's still that ongoing CBA negotiation or the battle between the Players' Union and the Australian Rugby League Commission and the NRL about renewing the CBA. All is not well in Australia, but as I say, I think the NRL is far superior to the Super League in growing the game, being the driving force behind the game. Do I see it happening? It could happen. It could. I think it would be a positive step if it did happen. Then you've got the downsides with the political climate right now between the UK and the rest of the European, and the European Union, of which the Republic of Ireland and France are both members of, and the fact that the RFL has really failed to grow the game outside the north of England successfully in England. It hasn't gone well. And I don't think the Super League is the right way to structure the game. The TV deal is not good enough. It's clearly obvious that money is an issue within the sport. The way the sport markets itself to potential new fans is a problem. Some of the commercial decisions taken have not gone well. But look, I think rugby league could take advantage of rugby union struggles as well. But the World Cup, while I did enjoy the Rugby League World Cup, I don't think it was as good as the 2017 tournament. That was very noticeable. A lot of empty seats at stadiums. Not a great marketing campaign. And yeah, it was a. I was while it was a good tournament, I wasn't overly impressed. Even though the crowd numbers were record breaking, a lot of empty seats, which disappointed me. But since the tournament was awarded to it actually taking place, a lot of economic and social things have happened. COVID, rising cost of living, and with a lot of the stadiums being in the north of England, which is not the wealthiest part of the world, let's be brutally honest, there's some very deprived areas economically and socially in the north of England. Um, it wasn't a good look seeing a lot of empty seats. I think they could have done more to encourage um, locals to give it a go and embrace the World Cup. But rugby league at international level is not on the same level as rugby union. And that's where I think rugby union's won that particular battle. Club level, though, I think rugby league could do better. Could it happen? It's possible. But looking at what happened with the Toronto Wolfpack and the Ottawa Races, there's been some real poor errors of judgment along the way with the RFL and its growth policy and the growth markets, the markets is attempted to grow the sport in. Um, so, as I say, it's possible. Whether it actually happens or not, and if there is an economic case for it working, we shall see. But I think rugby union and the Gaelic Athletic Association in Ireland will probably have a bit to say about that. And rugby union in Ireland is quite successful, and the Gaelic Athletic Association is quite popular, as we've seen with fan numbers and viewership. And I think they would have a part to play in whether it works or not. But Dublin's by city size is quite a sizable urban area. I think 1/5 of Ireland's population live in the Dublin metropolitan area, so it could work. It could happen. I think it will happen. Whether it happens soon or not is another thing. And then you've got to see if there's an interest from the Irish public to buy into it. That's something that we'll have to wait and see with whether it happens or not. But anyway, I'm going to leave that there. It's been an interesting live stream. Thank you very much for the questions. Really appreciate it. And yeah, that's a good note to leave on. Will Ireland ever fully embrace rugby league? It would go against Irish sporting culture to do so, I think. But you know, stranger things have happened. Obviously, they've now become a test nation when it comes to cricket. That was a long battle to get that status. And I will do a video on the history of rugby league in Ireland because I think that is an interesting nation to look at. So there we go. Thank you very much, obviously, for watching all your questions. Really appreciate it. And we've discussed a fair few things. There's a lot of things. Sport never stops. Sport never stops. Oh, you're from Belgium. Well, that's an interesting part of the world. I could look at Belgian football clubs. So there's Standard Liège, Anderlecht, Brussels FC, Charleroi. There's some interesting Belgian clubs with some interesting history that I could definitely look into there. Belgium, not overly popular in Belgium, this channel when it comes to the European viewers, but I could definitely look at some of the Belgian football clubs and their history in the game and player profiles because there's some really interesting players who played for Belgium. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Keep placing your thoughts in comment sections on videos, and I'll have some more content obviously for you guys very, very soon.